Borderlands, despite being an over-decade-old game franchise, has still retained its relevance in recent times. Whether it be because of the staying power of the addicting looter-shooter gameplay loop, the absolutely atrocious film that came out earlier this year that reminded everybody that Borderlands exists, a fifth entry being on the horizon, or the growing number of content creators making videos about various topics regarding the games and the franchise, Borderlands is no doubt experiencing a resurgence of sorts, for both good and bad reasons. Now, about that last point. A particular form of Borderlands content I've always admired is the challenge run, in which someone places an arbitrary set of restrictions on themselves, such as only using a particular set of items and or skills, or neither of those, in order to make the game more difficult to varying degrees. As a YouTube guy who's kind of on the outside looking in, and as someone who has over 1,000 hours in Borderlands 2, I thought, hey, why not give it a shot? I haven't made anything for YouTube in a long time, and I gotta get back into the swing of things somehow, and combining my main interest with something that I've been wasting my time with over the past year or so instead of pursuing said main interest could be the way to do it. After trying and failing to come up with a good idea that hasn't been done before and also running out of disk space for footage in the middle of a run, I decided to cut my losses and instead look to BL2's overlooked younger brother, the pre-sequel. Considering that I only have a little bit over a tenth of the playtime and as such less familiarity with the game overall compared to BL2, along with the fact that there aren't too many pre-sequel challenge runs out there, I thought this would be an interesting undertaking. So where would I go with that? Considering that I'm kind of a complete and utter psycho, how about beating the game using only one of, if not the worst action skill in the game? Hello, I'm Dingus, or Dingus the Kid, or Dingu2, whatever you want to call me. And today, we'll be answering a really dumb question. Can you beat Borderlands the pre-sequel as the meat unicycle? Let's find out. Of course, spoilers for the game if you haven't played it. Starting off on the character select screen, we're going to be playing as everyone's favorite annoying little yellow thing. Of course, for this run we're picking Claptrap as he is the only Vault Hunter in this game that has access to Meat Unicycle. So the burning question you may already be asking here is, how will you only use Meat Unicycle? Claptrap's action skill, vaulthunter.exe, is random, and to specifically proc one of a dozen or so abilities every single time would be statistically impossible, and to wait through potentially multiple cooldowns to proc Meat Unicycle every single time you needed it would take forever. In that case, you'd be right. At least in a vanilla setting, which is why we'll be running the unofficial community patch, which has the option to lock Claptrap out of the other abilities, leaving only Meat Unicycle. It's also important to note that this is the only part of the patch that I'll be using. None of the buffs or any other changes will be allowed. However, I have to admit that I did have other mods running, though they were merely quality of life changes, one of which, Alt Use Fenders, wasn't used at all throughout the entire run. Take the whole thing with a side of salt, or call the run invalid if you want, you're entitled to your opinion. With all of that out the way, I name and dress Little Clappy accordingly, and thus begins our journey.
Claptrap, start boot up sequence.
After answering Jack's call and crash landing on Helios Station, we're not only greeted by an annoying little blue thing, but also we come across our very first roadblock. You don't unlock your action skill until level 3. For my situation, this is an unavoidable thing since, unlike BL2, you're unable to fast travel to DLCs for early XP. I also don't have any friends who would want to be revived over and over for XP either. So, unfortunately, no. You can't beat Borderlands the pre-sequel as the Meat Unicycle. Not unless you cheat. Well, at least just this one time. We're going to use Gibbed Save Editor to get us to level 3, making sure not to give us any actual XP in order to not get overleveled immediately. Again, call the run invalid if you want, you're entitled to your opinion. With that, let's go ahead and go over the rules. Rule number 1, no badass rank. The standard rule for basically every Borderlands challenge run. Number 2, All damage to enemies must be done within the bounds of Meat Unicycle, which means no normal melee, guns, or butt slamming. Doing any of these things will result in an Alt F4 or save quit, with the former being preferable because it sets us back further in our progress and it preserves the bar challenge for slam damage. The only exceptions to this are barrels and head stomping, because they happen all the time in this game by accident, and we're only running Meat Unicycle, so we gotta handicap it somehow for the sake of my sanity. These two things can also be more of a curse than a blessing. Grenades, which you can apparently throw in Meat Unicycle, along with unique shields like the Shooting Star that deal damage outside of the melee attack in Novas, are allowed as further handicaps, but we will try to avoid them if they're not really needed. Rule number 3. In-slot gear except guns are allowed, which includes shields, Oz kits, grenade mods, and class mods. And finally, number 4. XP farming and read-only farming, including the grinder, are allowed. Back on Helios, the first set of enemies were seeming to fall quite easily since we were 2 levels over our enemies up to that point. Meat Unicycle, on paper, doesn't seem that bad. You get a 300% post-add melee damage bonus and a 20% move speed bonus, along with sporadic fire novas that go off at random intervals. However, one of the biggest problems, or rather set of problems with only using Meat Unicycle, was already beginning to rear its ugly head. The cooldown and duration. The thing with Claptrap's action skill is that, by default, it has a 40-second cooldown and a fixed 4-second startup on top of it. It's especially bad to deal with this early game since we don't have access to any class mods or skills like Through Thick and Thin that increase cooldown rate. Not only this, Meat Unicycle only has a flat duration of 20 seconds, and on top of that, while you do massive damage per Buzzax swing, you only get 1 swing a second. This all means that within the span of 1 minute, you get to swing a maximum of 20 times, though more often than not, it ends up being much less. It sounds bad, and don't get me wrong, it is, but it only gets better from here. So what are we doing here again? Oh yeah, we take a stupid amount of time to get rid of the second wave of enemies, help up our employer who gives us a shield, take out the turrets, stand around and listen to some unskippable dialogue, meet the big bad of the game, Colonel Zarpedon, stand around and listen to some more unskippable dialogue, and make our way to the first boss of the game, Flameknuckle. While he was kind of easy, the cooldown combined with another downside to riding on the Meat Unicycle build for one made it a pretty long fight. That reason being, Claptrap gets no knockback resistance. See, as you probably know, Meat Unicycle is a skill directly inspired by the BL2 Vault Hunter Krieg, who by default has said knockback resistance in order to better utilize his melee attacks. This also means he can't rocket jump or grenade jump as efficiently as the rest of the cast. Back to the pre-sack, Claptrap has none of that, and playing what is basically melee only with a fixed timer means that you can only get so many hits in before you get flung across the map like a ping pong ball and have to run back to the enemy you were fighting, or what usually happens, hide and wait for your cooldown again. While we're waiting on this cooldown, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, my main channel. This video may or may not be a one-off thing, but youtube.com/c/dinkusthekid for sure isn't. And while there probably isn't that much overlap between Borderlands players and people who want to watch video essays about arguably dated music, I suggest you check it out if you are within that minority. I haven't uploaded in a very long time, but I've had some good stuff cooking over the past year. Just you wait. Shameless plug out of the way, we kill Knuckle Dragger after getting our cooldown back, bash the poor loader out of the elevator with our Buzzax, kill that asshole, and Jack sends us to the moon to take care of the jamming signal affecting Helios. Landing on the moon, we meet one Janie Springs, a junk dealer who is thoroughly unimpressed with our status as the Meat Unicycle.
Cool.
She tells us to go get a broken Oz kit and kill some Kragans, during the excursion of which we experience our first death of the run to a pit after trying to get to a chest. Now is a good time to bring up the fact that I'm an incredibly unskilled player who merely feigns skill, which generally resulted in several stupid deaths like these. Anyway, after familiarizing ourselves with the locals and the wildlife, we do some side quests, including one that explicitly says to shoot targets and melee them instead. from this blatant breaking of the rules, we are rewarded with the Invigoration Oz kit. Now is another good time to bring up another flaw with Meat Unicycle: the lack of survivability. In comparison to Krieg's Buzzaxe Rampage, Meat Unicycle seems better on paper in terms of healing. As with Krieg, you get max health on kill, whereas with Claptrap, you heal a portion of your swing damage on top of the flat 2.5% health regen and full heal on startup that come with vaulthunter.exe. However, you still have to take into account the fact that you only have one swing per second, no knockback resist, and no skills to increase your duration, which means less chances to heal overall. You can heal off of Novas though through elemental damage over time, or dot damage, through the skill Maniacal Laughter, which is in the tree we're gonna go down this run. However, it's very inconsistent due to the stack building, and it only consistently works in places with atmosphere, since fire dots don't work in vacuums. Applying non-fire dots from barrels is possible, but is also inconsistent and usually results in less than 30 stacks. The Novas can also be more of a curse than a blessing, since if it randomly goes off and kills the enemy you are about to swing on, you don't get any of that healing. Also, due to the Novas proccing randomly, you can barrel troll yourself. On top of all of this, it's no surprise that a majority of the enemies in the gun game have guns, and with the measly 20% move speed bonus on top of the lack of knockback resist, you will be getting shot and dying a lot if you don't reach your targets and hit your swings. Anyway, what does all of this have to do with the Invigoration Oz kit? Well, it allows you to heal with oxygen tanks on top of restoring O2, and considering that they spawn everywhere, along with the fact that Claptrap doesn't suffer from O2 decay or suffocation, it's a good early game healing option. Moving forward, despite the bad cooldown, things are pretty easy up to this point. The main strategy right now is walk forward, hit things, and hide and occasionally do some clappy parkour when we need our cooldown back. As such, we take down Deadlift and make our way into Concordia with relative ease. After buying our 2 backpack SDUs, setting up the transmitters for Moxie, forgetting about the part of the mission where you use the console, and read-only farming for an overclocker comm from her which provides a whopping 9% increased cooldown rate, we make our way into Triton Flats, which is where the difficulty begins to really show itself. After once again familiarizing ourselves with the wildlife and reaching level 6, we have to take on the Darksiders in order to access Crisis Scar and take out the jamming signal. However, the Darksiders were far from easy. I was underleveled, which meant I wasn't doing enough damage, let alone one-shotting like earlier. The main guys, Magma Rivers, Wally Wrong, and Fair Dinkum, were pretty tanky, and to salt the wound, one of the guys on the first floor spawned with a Boomicorn, which does a stupid amount of damage. Through fighting the Darksiders, I found that getting downed was basically a death sentence, since outside of getting a lucky dot kill off, there's quite literally no way to get back up. Through this, I also learned the importance of timing. As vaulthunter.exe has a startup time of 4 seconds, it's crucial to time it well since you get your full heal on startup, which gives the enemies 4 seconds to whittle you down if you're in a bad position. Not only is it important for survivability, it's also important for damage, since you get a guaranteed Nova as soon as the startup ends and before you can start swinging, which creates the dilemma between waiting until the startup ends to push and losing out on some damage, or losing health to dish out more. On top of all this, it was also important to learn to back up before the end of the duration rather than right at the end, as it was very easy to get caught with my pants down if I played too aggressively. Anyway, after a long few cooldowns, we eventually triumph against the Darksiders and make our way to Crisis Scar, where we meet some of our first major adversaries, the Jetpack Lads, or airborne enemies in general. Considering that Meat Unicycle is a melee skill with a longer delay between attacks, along with the fact that unlike Krieg's action skill, you are unable to throw your Buzzaxe with a vertical slash being bound to right click instead, airborne enemies had to have perfect timing on swings due to how close you have to be. You do get a little bit of range with the Novas, but again, it's pretty inconsistent. While the jetpack scavs weren't too hard since they're just trash mobs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread about them. It would no doubt get much worse, and whatever I thought the worst would be, the actual worst was yet to come. Anyway, we take out these guys, pick up an Acrobat Oz kit from a random blue chest, and make it to RedBelly, the perps behind the jamming signal. Phase 1 of the fight was pretty easy, more of the same hyper-aggressive strat we've been running since the beginning, but the split was a different story. The thing here is that Red is a flying enemy, which we just talked about why that's a problem, though considering how slowly he moves and the fact that his crit spot is his body rather than his head, he wasn't that much of a problem. I only died to him once and spawned in the control room for some strange reason. Anyway, Belly on the other hand is insanely tanky and does a lot of damage with his dash attack, which both takes away a lot of health and knocks us far enough to not get any more. He also has a fire laser, which, while we are a robot and take less damage from fire and fire dots, they still really hurt early game. I found that the best way to deal with him was playing the pillars, since they were good cover. He would run into the barrels next to them and deal damage to himself, and they would stop him from moving during his dash. After taking him out and taking care of the signal relays, we find out that Red and Belly were underemployed themselves, though rather than Jack like us, they were hired by the Marif, the guy who runs Concordia. Or did, until Jack killed him. Now that that's done, we have to go find a combat AI for Jack's plans to build a robot army, but before we do that, we have to do the most fun thing in Borderlands the pre-sequel, farming the Darksiders for XP. So, here's to the first of many. After hitting level 10 and unlocking the grinder, we meet the greatest Borderlands character of all time, Davis Pickle, and go through the Outland Spur to get to the Bosun and his companion, the Skipper, the former of whom is said by Pickle to be housing an AI. When attempting to fight some enemies in the first station, I encountered a funny glitch when you get downed, get back up, and activate Meet Unicycle all at the same time, which leaves the buzz axe in your hand and the duration meter you'd usually only see in co-op on your screen until you save quit. It's pretty funny that it looks like Claptrap is hitting himself when you walk, kind of like Silence the Voices on Krieg, but arguably more annoying since you can't get rid of it.
It's the only way to stop the voices!
Anyway, this section was full of airborne enemies, and that Acrobat Oz kit I picked up earlier proved to be very useful, as it boosts melee damage while airborne. Well, it would have been if I equipped it, but nonetheless, we got through the mobbing just fine. Now, I hate to toot my own horn, but I think the rest of Outland Spur has some of the best footage of the rare and beautiful Clappy Bird that I have managed to capture throughout the run, so be prepared to bear witness to some crazy claptrap parkour.
Watch as we observe the rare and beautiful Clappy Bird!
A lot of this was possible through the look up while boosting to get more height and movement tech, along with the fact that tap and crouch while airborne does not trigger the slam. After barrel trolling myself and triggering that weird same frame glitch again, we eventually bridge the lava gap and make it to Pity's Fall. As we make our way to the Bosun, you may be asking the question, why aren't you using subroutines? The melee subroutine Ropaderp gives plus 150% melee and can be up to tripled later with triple clocked. For one, you only get one subroutine at a time regardless of type, which in our case would include health, shield, melee, and all of the different gun types. we would hardly ever be able to take advantage of the melee bonus, and the only other one that seems even remotely useful is health. Not only that, we would also be missing out on the insanely important survivability and utility that comes with the I love you guys tree, especially with the two previously mentioned skills, Maniacal Laughter and Through Thick and Thin. Going into the Drakensberg, I make a huge mistake in swapping out my level 4 Tediore shield from the beginning of the game with a turtle shield. Considering that you get hit around and shot like the 4th floor punch bag that Claptrap is, you basically never have your shield up, which makes running a turtle shield awful due to the lowered health. After dying once with it, I immediately swap it out and move forward. This part of the game seemed to be looking somewhat easier since the atmosphere in the majority of the map meant I was getting some extra damage and healing, but the first room already had its problems, since there was an armored outlaw with a corrosive Malawan sniper that kept killing me, which is another thing on its own. Earlier, I mentioned that Claptrap is a robot and takes less fire damage, but unfortunately, the trade-off here is that he takes increased corrosive damage instead, which is an incredibly common element to come across, not only with enemy weapons, but also with barrels. Not only this, as it says in his name, he had an armored health bar, which means less melee and fire damage. After trying to fight him and constantly dying in the process, I find that the door is open and just walk past him. As we push forward into the Drakensberg, it becomes more and more apparent that I'm not doing enough damage. I die, deal a little bit of damage, kill 1 or 2 guys, wait for my cooldown, kill a few more guys, die. It's all very methodical at this point. Fortunately, through my progress, I managed to find 3 green class mods, which I'll use later. But for now, watch this drive. After slowly but surely clearing out the engine room at the request of the skipper, we eventually reached the Bosun, only to find that basically all of the things that were troubling us were right there, sitting in that stupid little hover chair. Tanky, airborne, and a corrosive laser. I died a few times before throwing in the towel and going back to Concordia, where I would use those 3 class mods to make a blue one. Since we're running with the read-only rule, I decided to go for 2. A Robo Ninja for melee damage, and more importantly, a Radiating Overclocker, which we will use for basically the rest of the run. Not only do we need it for the cooldown from the passive itself, but it also gives plus 3 points in Through Thick and Thin for even more cooldown. Now was the time to grind up a level to be able to use it, so I decided to pay the Darksiders a quick visit, during which I picked up a better Acrobat Oz kit and got to level 12. Level 12 was important not only so I could use that overclocker comm, but also because this is the level when Roid shields start spawning. This was huge, since not only do we not usually have our shield up anyway, which means max damage most of the time, but also Meat Unicycle's melee boost is post-additive, which means that even a crappy white Roid shield with less than 100 damage would be doing so much more than it says on the card due to it being pre-add and thus being multiplied by Meat Unicycle. Speaking of, that's exactly what we picked up upon re-entry of the Drakensberg. All geared up, we were now ready to kill the Bosun. The general strat was to sacrificially take out the shield generators first, go out on the offensive when he's near the top platforms or in the back part of the room, and go on defense when he's out of reach, when we get low, or our duration runs out. Unfortunately, this fight was just a complete skill issue on my part. I was so bad at pulling this off and died several times, and out of muscle memory, I save quit, which means I had to run all the way back and destroy the shield generators again. I'm so bad at the game that while trying to get back and do some cool parkour, I fell into the first pit twice. For my incompetence, I was rewarded with a better Roid shield in the first fender of the ship, and as soon as I make it back to the arena, I locked in only to find that after destroying the generators, the Bosun got stuck on the back railing. Sorry guys, I jumped on his head. Run invalid. Anyway, after killing that schmuck, we find out that the skipper, who later changes her name to Felicity, was the AI we were looking for all along. Now, rather than respond to the urgency of Jack's situation and build his robot army, I thought it was the right move to instead go and farm the Darksiders again since I was kind of underleveled. After reaching 13 and 9/10, it was time to go do the thing. The first half was relatively easy since most of the enemies were Torques, which, by the way, one of the most satisfying things throughout this run was grouping up a bunch of Swarmlings and killing them all with one Nova and also getting a whole lot of XP. Through this, we got to level 14, which got us one of our most important skills. You're Going to Love Me, which spawns a healing Nova on kill, giving us the much needed healing from Nova kills. Anyway, a lot of the ease of this map came from the fact that there were plenty of places to hide if I was low and or I needed my cooldown back. The scavs weren't much of a problem either, considering the massive amount of atmosphere throughout the entire map, which meant more damage and healing. After clearing out a bunch of them and wondering whether or not I accidentally killed one with slam damage only to find out that I didn't, we come into contact with Gladstone, a big old nerd formerly of Hyperion's research and development team who's working on a prototype robot constructor, whom we help with discretion from Jack. Before we do any of that stuff though, we had to sit through a whole bunch of unskippable dialogue, and afterward, we came across another big recurring obstacle in the literal sense, the power suits. Power suits are incredibly tanky, armored, pack a punch, and also tend to knock you around a whole lot, which is a recipe for disaster for the little meat unicycle that could. It wasn't that bad here, since I used the crates in the room where they spawn to soften the knockback and deal more damage. A lucky cryo barrel also happened to be nearby, which helped take the other one down, overall taking just 2 cooldowns. Going into production plant, things seemed not too hard, since it was just what you'd normally do in this part of the game. Kill scavs, kill security bots, build the eye, wait for turrets to kill scavs, wait for Felicity to kill scavs, die several times in between those things, so on and so forth. I do want to take a bit of time to talk about Cryo, since I died to this badass outlaw who threw a Cryo AoE grenade at me. When people talk about the pre-sequel, they often talk about how broken Cryo is, which it is, even in our case, as shown by the power suit, but it can also be a death sentence, since our only way of applying it ourselves is through barrels, which of course can hurt us as well. However, neither the explosion nor the dot of the cryo barrels is what kills us. What actually does is the massive speed reduction. Taking into account everything I've said about Meat Unicycle thus far, speed reduction equals no damage or healing and leaves you as a sitting duck, which is something we shouldn't be able to do in the first place since we don't have access to that skill. Anyway, after dying several times in the room before the boss fight, we are unfortunately forced to put a very apprehensive Felicity into a killing machine, thus beginning said boss fight. Now, the main reason why I made an exception for head stomping was because of enemies and bosses like Felicity who you can get stuck in, which ends up dealing a whole lot of head stomp damage, at least visually. The first attempt, despite being promising, ended up as a dud since I accidentally did slam damage, so that ended up in an Alt F4. Going back through the map and back into it, Felicity Rampant seemed quite easy, but was actually far from it. In her first phase, she has a stomp attack that both does a decent bit of damage, and more importantly, knocks us pretty far, which costs us some of our precious duration. She also spawns with attached turrets with individual health bars, and she can construct drones which can make her invulnerable and heal her, which further subtracted the damage I could potentially be doing to the boss herself. It also proved to be hard to find places to hide and get my cooldown back due to the openness of the arena. The constructor phase proved to be even harder, as not only can she still spawn the drones, she also spawns in loaders who can knock you around and divert your attention even more. She also has a close range laser and a devastating slam attack which can health gate you immediately. This was the first boss to be a true test of micromanagement, skill, and patience, though after a few failed attempts and a final 5-minute bout, Krieg Trap emerged as the victor, and Felicity was no more. She's a constructor now. This is so sad. Can we hit 50 likes, please? Now that Jack has his robot army, it's time to take back Helios with him, along with Lilith and Roland from the first Borderlands video game. It may come to a surprise to you, but Helios is where we're actually headed instead of the Darksiders. Anyway, we get transported to the wrong side of the station and find that Zarpedon still has access to Helios' defenses despite taking out the jamming signal 10 levels ago, so we have to fight our way into Jack's office. Considering that I'm a claptrap specifically programmed to fuel the blood and nothing else, we have to use another annoying little blue thing to open the door to the office. It's more of the same at this point. Press a button, fight some guys, die several times, press the button again, fight some more guys, you get the picture. While we were supposed to take the claptrap that isn't me into Jack's office to override the defenses, he dies in the door opening process, which means that we have to go rescue Gladstone and some other scientists in research and development and get them to disable the defenses instead. The scaling is weird in this game since we go from a level 16 hub of heroism to a level 19 R&D. I'm only level 16, so you know what that means. More Darksiders farming. Getting to 19 is great since it allows us to fully spec Pain Simulator as Painful, which is one of our best defensive skills. Not only does it give a whopping 30% more health, but it also provides a decent 20% damage reduction. Anyway, R&D was more of the same again, but this time we had to deal with Stalkers, who were arguably the worst enemy type in Borderlands 2. While this is pretty much the only section of the game with them in it, they're still a real pain since they don't do enough damage to activate my Roid shield, and they seemingly only take damage from Novas while invisible, raising the time to kill even further, especially the mini-boss XSTLK-23. It took way longer than it should have, not only because of the mentioned problems with Stalkers, but also because his shield was super tanky and regened pretty quickly after my durations ended. I wanted to show this part of the fight specifically since I got stuck here and I thought it was kind of funny. The whole mission in general is longer than it should be because of all the standing around and waiting for unskippable dialogue or the scientists to open doors. The pacing is just kind of bad here. It's the slow part of the game and nothing else really interesting happens here, which is why I don't really have much else to say. We did it, it happened, moving on. After saving the scientists who have done nothing but positive work for Hyperion, including lowering the Helios defenses, Jack rewards them with murder. Lucky for me, before entering the veins of Helios, I'm rewarded with another trip to Darksider territory. After getting to level 21 and grinding a new shield, we kill some more bad guys and do some more crazy clappy parkour in the lunar launching station to get to the command center with Jack, only to find that Zarpedon has locked us out of the laser, and I, being the obedient little Krieg trap that I am, have to go shut it down manually at Moxie's advice. But before we do that... So after getting to level 24, we head back to the station, hit a couple of gamer moments, get a shooting star from the power suit noob first try, miss arguably the second easiest of the 3 gamer moments, take down the barrier, and make it into the Eye of Helios, where we finally come face to face with Colonel Tungstina Zarpedon. Funnily enough, she wasn't that hard of a fight. Other than the annoying shield regen and the stomp attack that knocks us back, along with my shield getting back up more than I'd liked, it was more of the same. Play aggressive when the skill is up, hide when it's not, rinse and repeat. Her ascended phase was even easier since her crit box was in a lower spot, and she took more damage from me since she was no longer armored. We eventually take her down, and before unceremoniously dispatching her, Jack learns from Zarpedon that the vault is already opened, but before we can enter it, we still have to shut down the Helios laser. We come to the revelation that Jack took the Eye of the Destroyer from the final boss of Borderlands the First, released in 2009, and used it to power Helios' big laser, though Moxie tricks us into over-injecting it with slag, and with the help of her pals Lilith and Roland, causes a massive singularity that rips through the station in an attempt to kill us, as in me and Jack. After Jack gets pissy and throws a tantrum, we farm a new purple Roid shield from him, and soon enough, it's time for the beginning of the end. Before we progress any further though, we farm Bloodshots for one last time. I mean Darksiders, we do Darksiders again. Entering Virago Solitude, I couldn't help but feel an incredible sense of dread as we made our way to the excavation site. Of course, this is where we start fighting the Guardians, which, for all intents and purposes, are basically just flying stalkers with better projectiles and suck even more to deal with. But this wasn't the main problem that was settling in my little robotic brain. No, that would come with the entry into Outfall Pumping Station. I knew from the start that this part of the game would actually be the hardest, and it was the main thing I was dreading to face throughout this entire playthrough. The true final boss of sorts was waiting for me right down that elevator. If only I'd known how hard it would actually be. You may be thinking, RK5 is a flying boss that basically requires you to shoot at him, considering that pretty much all of his attacks and phases have him so high up, along with the fact that the infinite vertical melee bug from Borderlands 1 and 2, which allows you to hit whatever is straight above you from any distance, was taken out of the pre-sequel. How are you going to pull this off? Is this even possible? Well, given that this video was made to begin with, the answer is yes. It is completely possible. You see, RK5, despite the seemingly random nature of his different attacks, has some decent telegraphing behind them. For example, when he is on the farthest most side relative to the elevator and travels towards it, he can do a circle back around and go into the corner of the cliff, which then he will be in the middle spot over the chasm and do his missile attack. The one that's most important to this particular run involves him flying away from the elevator in between these two pillars, after which he will slightly move to the right facing the elevator and land to the left of these barracks to do a grounded laser barrage, to which then there is a small window before he starts sweeping along the map where he is completely still next to these barracks, which leaves him open to melee damage, thus making this fight seemingly doable with only Meat Unicycle. The problem though was the execution itself. As I no doubt have mentioned before, I am not a skilled player, and pulling this off was going to be the ultimate test of not only skill and patience, or rather lack thereof, but also everything I've learned about Claptrap and Meat Unicycle thus far. The first few attempts went very poorly, since not only were they taking a long time, as telegraphing does not equal a guaranteed pattern, but also I was getting used to said patterns and activated Meat Unicycle either too early or too late. I also kept making the mistake of popping it as he came down rather than a few seconds before, as the startup time only reduced the window to attack. On top of all this, there were usually a few Marines all around the map shooting at me, which meant that I either had to tank the hits and wait for RK5 to come down to pop the skill, or waste a cooldown to kill them and risk not having it up for when RK5 came down. The latter usually happened, and further increased the amount of time these attempts took. After getting into the swing of things, I came across yet another problem. You see, the easiest way to hit him during Phase 1 is to stand on the farthest most barracks and hit him in the right thruster. Issue is, after destroying it and entering Phase 2, you are unable to hit him there again, meaning you either have to go to the barracks on the side of the map with the elevator in order to hit the left thruster, where the window to hit him was even shorter as he only really lands on the furthest most side, with it basically being impossible to hit him when he does land on the closer side, leaving the only real opportunity to be after he's done sweeping from the far side. Or, the more reasonable set of options, you have to go around him and hit him in the cockpit, or go inside of him and attack him that way. The cockpit method allows for more damage per swing since that's his crit spot, but going inside is typically more consistent and allows you to get more swings in since you don't have to go all the way around him. Both strats run the risk of quick death, not only from contact damage, which RK5 seems to have, but also the shock projectiles he constantly fires out can shred you, especially when you're inside or really close to him and you have no cover. Healthgate is basically what makes this part even remotely possible, so keeping yourself topped off is absolutely crucial. On the note of the shock projectiles, they really sting even from far away where they can be easily dodged, though an easy way I've found to do so is by either hiding behind the cliffside or AD strafing on the roof of the barracks. However, this is also made more difficult by the fact that he has tracking missiles which home in on your current position and shoot towards you. They can also be avoided by hiding behind the cliffside, but it becomes a problem when you're in the line of sight of the Marines who will shoot you. It's a lot of clappy parkour to dodge everything. Granted, it's not the hardest thing, but it's a lot of micromanagement when taking into account watching the boss's pattern for a chance to attack on top of everything you have to dodge in the meantime. The boss itself isn't even the end of it, as moving further into the second phase, there's a mobbing section which spawns a handful of Elemental and Serra Guardians, the latter of which are especially annoying due to how high they can fly and how much damage their projectiles do. Not only this, more Marines would also spawn, and even more would replace the ones that were killed earlier due to the enemy respawn timer usually being reset by then. Despite all of the mobs, it's basically impossible to second wind, since most of the map doesn't have atmosphere without wasting time to set them all up, which means virtually no dot kills, and RK5 can actually kill the Marines when he lands on one of the few spots with atmosphere. With all of that said, here's a general strategy I found to be most effective. Step 1. For the opening, camp the farthest most barracks in the cliffside, activate the atmosphere, and when RK5 comes down, break the right thruster. Step 2. Go around and hit the cockpit, or go inside and hit him after he comes down again. Step number 3. 80 strafe and or hide behind the cliffside to dodge the shock projectiles and the missiles. Step number 4. Kill the Marines if they had bad guns, such as corrosive and cryo elementals, snipers, or lasers, put too much pressure on me, or for healing if necessary. Otherwise, keep focus on RK5. Number 5. Focus the Serra and Elemental Guardians during the mobbing section and hide in the elevator, making sure to watch for RK5's laser barrage attacks before going back out. Number 6. Hide in the elevator when below health gate or whenever necessary. The elevator, specifically the doorframe, is a really good spot to hide in, but just watch for RK5's ground attacks since its hurt box can phase through the shaft and hit you if you sit on the doorframe. Number 7. Pop meat unicycle early if below health gate. And lastly, number 8, brute force the deathbed phase, since up to this point I hadn't got there and that was probably the move. Despite the thorough learning and planning, I died. And died. A whole lot. Through my failed attempts, I seem to have accidentally done 144 slam damage as shown by the bar challenge. I looked through all the footage, and I genuinely can't point out when this happened, and it's kind of my fault too, since I have a Fire Oz kit which looks too much like the Fire Nova. Given that I broke my own rules, I guess the run is finally actually invalid, so therefore, no. You can't beat Borderlands the pre-sequel as the meat unicycle. However, I got this far, and victory was right there, just out of reach. The slam damage didn't really matter anyhow, since 1, I didn't kill anything with that damage, and 2, I failed those attempts and had to save quit anyway. So we pushed forward, checking the bar challenges every so often to make sure we didn't do more slam damage. I still died though. A whole lot more. As tempted as I was to throw in the towel after losing such a good run where I got a little too aggressive and used one of the handicaps from the rules, either the shooting star we got earlier or grenades, I knew RK5 was very doable with just the badly parted non-unique Roid shield, the Acrobat Oz kit, the radiating overclocker comm, the Novas, and my Buzz Axe. I was so close this time. I knew I could do it again and then some. I just had to silence the voices and lock in. It only took a 30-minute fight within the over 3.5 hours I spent on attempts, but I defeated the biggest adversary of the run. With a newfound sense of pride in my epic gaming skills, it seemed like it was basically over. Or was it? Going from Tycho's Ribs into Elseer was more or less the same as moving through every other section of the game. Attack, cooldown, play slow, etc. For funsies, we got So Retro, and after clearing that out, rushing through the rest of the map, and using our cooldown to attack the cannon that opens the gate only to find that there was no cannoneer inside, we make it to our final destination. But before we fight the actual final boss, there was one obstacle that proved to be pretty tough. Opha Superior. Not only could it spawn several Guardians, it had most of the problems of the Guardians, including an incredibly tanky shield. Coupled with the fact that it can also spawn little things called Putty which can regenerate its shield, we were in for a long one. After a handful of cooldowns though, we took it out, and at last, we were at the final boss of the game, the Sentinel. Unfortunately, pride came before the fall and I died on my first attempt, since I was playing way too aggressively. However, once I remembered my status as the Meat Unicycle, I locked in once again. After the strategic nightmare that was RK5, the Sentinel was basically a victory lap. Hide behind the pillars for cover and during cooldown, get smacked around a little bit by the Sentinel's attack and go on the offensive when the skill's up, rinse and repeat through the phases until it falls. Funnily enough, despite taking nearly an hour, the Empyrean Sentinel wasn't that hard either. It just took a long time since the only viable damage window was during the platform phase, which, if I wanted to play risky, I could jump up, hit its face, and typically get stuck in its head, though the safer strat was just to stand still and let the Novas do all the work. After an incredibly slow first two phases, we meet our true final challenge, the corrosive phase. While it seemed to be more of the same, one major issue was the vomit attack, in which the Sentinel slams its arms and vomits a massive corrosive puddle between them. The main problem is that it typically overlapped with where its face would be during the platform phase, which was the only point where I could get my hits in. One bad move and I would have to do the entire boss again, which, keep in mind, considering that half of the fight was damaging shields and most of my damage was coming from Novas, it would take a stupid amount of time to get back where I was. Channeling all the energy from the lives lost and the disembodied voices in my processing unit that were trudging me through this journey, it was time for the little meat unicycle that could to lock in one last time. So yes, you can beat Borderlands the pre-sequel using only Meat Unicycle, if you don't count that 144 slam damage. On that note, here's me going through the bar challenges if you're skeptical of the validity of this since I didn't stream it or anything. Overall though, this is something I would not recommend anyone do, not even the craziest of psychos. As Claptrap himself says upon activating Meat Unicycle,
This was a really bad idea.
it's really not fun spending half of the game either waiting, getting slapped around, or being dead. Could this be possible with a max level character in UVHM? Perhaps, but I'm not the one who's willing to try. Not right now. Anyway, I got some funny videos about Boomer Tunes to work on. Joking aside though, I had a lot of fun making this one, and gaming videos are something I will probably come back to someday. I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you're doing well, and I hope to see you again in the next one. If there is one. Or on my main channel, youtube.com/c/dingousthekid or whatever. Bye!